Iranian protests. Let's talk about it. I happen to work very close to Iran, so I tend to pay attention to what is going on in the news cycle and what you see on social media. Now, I'm not physically in Iran, but I do get a very interesting perspective from the multicultural environment that I happen to work in. Now, what I want to talk about today is not the fact that there's protests. What I'm interested to know is your thoughts, particularly if there's any Iranians on here that might have an opinion on what is the most likely outcome, or what is the outcome that you're hoping for from these protests. If you're able to overthrow the regime, what is the next type of governance that you hope comes into power? There's a very strong likelihood that the Revolutionary Guard, having access to the weaponry of the country, could become the next dictator. And in that case, you might even be worse off than you are with the current Ayatollah. Best case scenario is some kind of constitutional republic. But I've also heard that there's perhaps some kind of constitutional monarchy due to the prince still being around and some support for him to come back into power. Do you Iranians want international assistance, or do you want to manage this at a national level without outside interference? And if you are able to overthrow the Ayatollah and you have some form of new government, what does that look like? Are you isolationist and fiercely independent, or will you seek out alliances with the traditional allies you have, such as Syria, Russia, China? Or will you become more liberal in your values and seek alliances with Western powers and become a more open society as you were back in the mid 20th century, where it was more like a European country and beach culture, and women didn't have to cover or worry about being arrested for putting a social media post online. So I'm just kind of curious, what is your preferred outcome as an Iranian people? Now, obviously, you can't speak for the entire Iranian people, but you can speak for yourself. Maybe you're in Iran, maybe you're outside Iran, maybe you have family there, but I'd really like to know what your perspective is on the current situation inside Iran with the protests going on. Now, having looked at the internal struggle of Iran and possible outcomes, my next question is, how does that affect things regionally? You know, you got a lot of different countries that have interests in trade and oil and gas exports, and an interruption to Iranian supply will affect countries like China, but potentially could also affect the Straits of Hormuz, which has a large percentage of the world's oil that is transited through there. So if there's a disruption to trade, that would drastically affect the oil markets. But after, let's say, things settle down and a government in favor of the West gets in power, how is that managed? Does Iranian oil and gas suddenly become very available to the market? And how does that affect the other OPEC countries? Because now you have oil and gas that is on the market and could potentially drop the pricing. The next question is, how does this affect countries like China and Russia? Russia is in no position to offer any assistance. They can't provide weapons, they can't provide troops. All they can provide is pretty much what they offered the Venezuelan president Maduro, their goodwill and words of support. So, you know, if Iran were to fall, Russia would lose a valuable ally, but maybe not such a valuable ally because they don't really help each other when the chips are down and they need the help. But China gets a lot of its oil out of Iran. So how does that look for China if they've suddenly lost a Venezuelan supply and then they lose their supply, even temporarily, out of Iran? What happens there? Another really important element to bring up is that Iran is a big supporter of destabilizing groups in the region. such as the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas. So if the regime falls and that funding stops, even for a short period of time, what does that look like? Is that an opportunity for some of these other nations that are in conflict with these groups to take advantage of that interruption? Or is it a long-term, no more funding, the next government that comes in will not reinstate that funding, and what we see is an end to the Houthis and the Hezbollah and Hamas, because you would need another country in the world to pick up that funding. So it's an interesting dynamic, and one that I would think there's many different actors in the region that would take advantage of that. So, and then the broader geopolitical spectrum is between the UN, NATO, and America. Would they intervene in any way? Does this become another failed state where you have terrorist organizations or basically a fractured vigilante groups and militias that will populate within Iran, and it becomes a failed state where there's no centralized power and trade doesn't open up? There's no, more like a Libya style failed state. Do you think the United States will intervene? Trump has said that he would if protesters start getting killed. But do you think Trump would actually, or the United States would actually intervene militarily? And if they do, in support of the protesters, and actually topple the regime, what's that look like? Do the Iranians accept whatever form of interim government the Americans will put in place? Or would they rebel against that, or fight against that, or push back against that? Those are my thoughts. I don't have any answers for you. Just a ton of thoughts that are rolling around my head as I'm, very close to that country. And if you don't think it affects you, it will. Everybody relies on oil and gas. It's woven into our civilization. The price and the supply affects every aspect of our lives. So this is a key moment in history, and we'll see what happens. I hope for the best for the Iranian people. I hope you get the change and the freedom that you deserve and that you're looking for in whatever fashion or form that you choose that it should take. My understanding is posts about Iran are being censored in some fashion, so make sure you like and subscribe to help bump this to a broader audience. If you're watching this as a YouTube short, this is likely a clip from a longer video that I'll post on my YouTube channel. That's it for today. Thanks for listening.